see it?
I do, and I hope everyone can hear me. Again, my name is Kim Stillman. I'm the lead for Inpatient Clinical Systems for OTSG. And just a little bit about my background. I am a registered dietitian by background. I then moved on to become the Essentris System Administrator at Launchstool Regional Medical Center. I was there in that role for about 2 years, and from there moved to work for OTSG with standardization. So with that said, this is something that's kind of been in the works for the last couple of years. So if we can go ahead to the next slide, or no, I think I can do my own slides. Okay, cool. Sorry. So today what we'll do is we'll talk a little bit about the business need and scope of the inpatient optimization and standardization project. Explain what a CAG is, to include the definition, membership, what CAGs do, etc. Hopefully you've kind of started to hear some of these terms around your Essentris folks in your inpatient facilities. We'll talk about how we are creating and testing new content, and as well as how training fits into all of this. I want to make sure that you all are aware and can see and find the Essentris Resource Center, as it will be a great tool for you. Elizabeth, I see that people are getting. I also see many people have put tips in the screen, in the chat screen, so make sure and check those out. I know they can help. Muting is always a good thing. I just don't know how to mute my computer, but fortunately I'm speaking, so I don't have to. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and go on with a little bit of background. So like I said, this is a project that's been going on for the last couple of years, and even before that, I've only been involved for the last couple of years, which is when we've really been pushing on the scope and moving into this with the Navy and the Air Force. So as most of you well know, Essentris was deployed as an interim solution to Alta, probably 4 or 5 years ago at this point, to fulfill the inpatient requirement. The application has the ability to provide standard system configuration. However, just to make sure everyone fully understands this, Essentris is not like Alta in the fact that it's centralized. Essentris has a server at each individual facility, which currently allows each individual facility to customize the server. So that's what we are kind of taking back and looking at all of the notes and the documentation and the configurations within Essentris, so we can do it centrally. So there is the ability, but it's not a central server like with Alta. So we have taken a leadership role in developing this consistency and documentation. We, as in myself and Carol Sadio, both lead some of the CAGs, which I will explain soon, and we participate in all of them, as well as many of our clinicians. The scope of the project is to look at current best practices, regulatory requirements, as well as the clinical requirements for documentation in order to provide the best care for our patients. We will work with the teams to effectively meet our ORIX and HEDIS measures, Joint Commission standards. We have folks from all of those different areas, coding, Joint Commission, patient safety included in our groups. And then the capability will not only allow for all of that, but will also allow for consistent data usage across the facilities, which will allow for centralized reporting, which is something that is not being done with Essentris right now. So in addition, using clinical CPGs, standardizing the database will allow for embedding these regulatory metric data points, which is, like I said, will allow for the standardized reporting. I see there's a question about the 3M data mapping project, and I can kind of touch on that, which right now is probably a good time. Essentially, there is another project that is taking place at the same time as the standardization project. So the standardization project that I'm talking about is standardizing the front end, if you will, of Essentris. So what do the notes look like, the flow sheets, the summary screens, etc. And then this 3M data mapping project is where essentially you have different database items being used at different facilities to represent the same thing. So, for example, at Eisenhower, the database item for let's say weight may be the word weight spelled out, but at Madigan it may be WT, and then at Brooke it may be WT LBS for weight pounds. So those three items all mean the exact same thing, but because they're different, we would not be able to very easily pull standardized information about them. So essentially, as we deploy the standard content, one of those database items will be chosen, and we're working with this 3M group to see which database items are used most commonly, so we can pick the one that most facilities are using, which in the case of weight is probably the word weight spelled out. So you choose that one, and then all of those other versions of that are mapped to that weight, and then it can be used for reporting. And this is across the board. I mean, there's thousands of database items, and thousands of them that would come into reports as well. So I'm going to leave it right there for now. If you have more specific questions, we can talk about it at the end of the session. So in addition to the quality measures, coding I kind of mentioned, we have coders involved in all of our front-end note template building, so we can make sure we are pulling in every piece of information that we need for full medical coding. Additionally, from a training standpoint, as your clinicians move from facility to facility, there will not be the need to retrain them on the system over and over and over again. Right now, most of our clinicians, if they've used Essentris before, will know how to use the program. So we move into more of the business process workflow type training, which is as a side effect, if you will, of documentation standardization. You do get some workflow standardization, but that more than likely will become the focus, in my opinion. I'm not a trainer, but in my opinion, that would be the focus of training down the road for Essentris. And then we're also working with the VA is included in our standardization discussions, and so we're already working towards the transition of the DoD VA integrated health record. The VA has thousands of terms that they have standardized, so we're able to take some of those terms and implement them right now into our standard content, which is leading us down a road to have an easy transition to this IEHR. Okay, so now I'll go ahead and explain what a CAG is and get into some more detail about what is happening with the standardization work. CAG stands for Content Advisory Group. Essentially, a CAG is made up of subject matter experts from hopefully all of your facilities. So, for example, I lead the Med-Surg CAG. We have physicians from many facilities, but they range from internal medicine to family medicine to intensivists. We have cardiologists. We have a few surgeons. Pediatricians are joining us now. So we are going to the facilities and getting folks that are working with patients every day. We do also have subject matter experts who are a little bit away from the bedside, but for the most part, our SMEs are bedside providers and nurses and other clinicians. So as I've mentioned a couple of times, quality management and coding are always involved in these CAGs as well, because when we look at the requirements, we're really concerned that we're meeting the baseline requirements for documentation and then adding that additional clinical piece on top. So in order to get these SMEs, the way we started was we would go to the MedCom clinical consultant for the specialty area. From there, we would ask for 3 different types of SMEs. We would have the specialty lead, which may be the clinical consultant or a designee, as well as a specialty facilitator, and that person is still most likely at a leadership position, and they have easy access to that clinical consultant. So that facilitator can participate in our meetings on a regular basis as they keep the consultant informed about what's going on and make sure that everything the group is doing is in alignment with what the consultant has in mind as well. That team helps identify the functional SMEs from the facilities. In addition to that, we are always soliciting and accepting additional SMEs from all your facilities. So I'll put the plug here, as I put it in most meetings where I address standardization, that we are interested. If you have folks who from any area that are interested in participating in this project, please let us know. So this slide here really shows you everything that's going on with standardization and how the makeup is comprised. So, for example, I'm going to start with the specialty CAGs and then go up to the enterprise CAG. So if you look at your slide, hopefully you have a nice clear picture of it. You can see all of the different groups that are going on right now. We have med-surg nursing, provider, perioperative anesthesia, nursing, surgeons, perinatal, to include the maternal and the newborn side. We also have behavioral health that just started up. The emergency care, which AMED's not really involved with, but there is an ED group as well. We also have ancillary services. We have chaplains, lab, pharmacy, physical therapy, respiratory are all up right now. All of the other ones will be coming up. They're just not up at this point. And then we have our administrative services. So in addition to having our coders participate in each individual CAG, they also have their own CAG, where that group, many times if something's going on, and here's an example for you, with the chaplain CAG, we called one of our notes chaplain narrative. It's just a free text narrative note. But some folks had made comments that the word narrative was confusing because they're expecting a discharge summary or something like that. So we took the question to the admin services CAG and said, is it okay that we call this chaplain narrative? And they came back and said, no, it's not okay. You need to call it chaplain notes. So right now, I mean, it's okay, right? It's not like going to get us in trouble or anything. But for those of you who are familiar with this, currently you have the chaplain narrative. But down the road, as we start deploying additional things, we will eventually deploy that same note called chaplain note rather than chaplain narrative. So we were a little ahead of the game with the chaplains on that one, but now for the rest of our CAGs, we know not to use the word narrative in the note title. That I guess you have to be a coder or a bad person to understand that one. I didn't think it was a big deal, but that's why we have the admin services CAG. So we go from our specialty CAGs to our domain CAG. And so you can see that's where we have med-surg, periop, perinatal, admin services, ancillaries. Those groups met, they met a while ago, and that's the group that was mostly leadership based, that came up with the initial goals and priorities for the specialty CAG. Now, in many cases, that domain CAG rolled right into a specialty CAG. So the same people that were included in the domain group are still included in the specialty group. And we just brought in additional SMEs at that time. Now, if the domain CAG ever has issues that need to go up through governance, they come to the enterprise CAG. And I'll give you an example on this one. Copy note, copy forward, as some of you call it. Some facilities have this functionality turned on, others do not. So we a while ago wrote up a decision brief about copy forward, so we could send it to the enterprise CAG, and we could send it to the IIPT, which is the Inpatient Integrated Product Team. That is the tri-service version of the AIPT, who, for those of you that participate in the AIPT, is the Army Inpatient Product Team. So essentially, that enterprise CAG is made up of our mostly our informatics type leadership. So from the Army side, you have myself, Carol Sadio, Chris Nichols, as well as we have similar leaders from the Navy and the Air Force. We will bring in specialty participants as we need to, depending on what the topic is that group is talking about. This week, the Enterprise CAG is meeting in person. It's actually the first time this specific group has met in person. So essentially, we will be reviewing the scope of the project. We'll be reviewing all the methodology and everything that we're doing, to make sure that everybody's still where we originally said they would be with the project, and then we can tweak things as we need to, talk about deployment, things like that. So if things don't go well at the IIPT and it's something that needs to go through a higher level of governance, the IIPT will then take it to the CPMB, which is made up of the CMIOs, the Chief Medical Information Officers of all three services. So as well as other folks. I'm not as familiar with everyone that's involved in that, but that is kind of how things move up through governance. So for alpha and beta testing, some of you are familiar with this because I see names of folks at facilities where we have done either alpha or beta testing. I can tell you right now, actually the only facilities in the Army that have any content, well, first of all, the only content that has been released as general release is the chaplain content. So at this time, unless you're an alpha or a beta site, you do not have any of the standard content except for the chaplain content. There's two chaplain notes. One is called chaplain assessment and note, and the other is called chaplain narrative. So those are the only two standard notes that your facilities would have at this point. We are at a point where we have many different notes in this alpha and beta phase. So essentially, to get to the alpha and beta phase, the content's created by the CAG. So this is where coding and quality management are absolutely vital to make sure that we meet those baseline requirements, not only for coding, but also for Joint Commission and any other regulatory groups or topics, or ORIX, HEDIS, that sort of thing that we need to meet. Then our clinicians will review all of that and add any of the additional pieces. Everything is validated over again. This is a process that kind of happens over and over and on top of each other and at the same time over a period of time. Once the content has been fully created, it's reviewed by a quality group, and this group, as of right now, is mostly made up of, well, it is made up of all Essentris system admin trained individuals. We did have, and we do have, system administrators from our facilities who have volunteered to be part of this QA group. Essentially, what happens is there's a checklist that person is supposed to go through and check different pieces of the note and how it works. Check for simple things, but they're also simple things to miss, like spelling, and unfortunately there's no spell check when it comes to configuring things in Essentris. Also, choice lists and making sure that casing is standard. Also, we've been working very hard on making sure, because we do have all these different CAGs, making sure that each CAG is handling similar things in a similar way. So for example, many of the different CAGs may have to document pain within their notes. So we want to make sure that from CAG to CAG we're being consistent and standard. It may not sound difficult, but it can be quite a challenge at times, because all these groups are meeting on a weekly basis. And as you could see in this last slide, that's a lot of meetings, a lot of meetings to cover and to make sure that people are kind of following the same guidelines. So pain is an example. Another example is simply when you look at med-surg, perinatal, behavioral health, making sure that if they have separate H&Ps, which they may or may not, but if they do, making sure that those H&Ps are consistent, and that we're getting the medical history and that sort of thing in a consistent way. I don't have it in the presentation, but another functionality that is coming with this standardization is called ICE and Melder. Those of you who are using ED have ICE, and those of you that are not using the ED module most likely do not. But essentially what ICE allows is the medications from CHCS. It's just a beefed up interface from CHCS to Essentris is what ICE is. So essentially now, instead of just demographics and labs coming over from CHCS to Essentris, you also get the medication profile coming over. So the providers really like that because they don't have to type everything in by hand. You also get, with Melder, once the clinician has typed in the patient's past medical history, and then that patient is discharged, the next time they come back, that past medical history will be filled out for them. It will pre-populate with what was there during the last stay. And so when I talk about consistency from note to note and H&P to H&P, it's really important for all of this functionality to work the way it's supposed to, that happens. So some of these are lessons learned that we're getting as we go through the process, and others are things that we've been kind of focusing on for a while. So back to the alpha and beta validation testing, the QA group will review the documentation for all these different things. There's not only the checklist, but there's also a configuration guide, which goes through some of the things I just mentioned. How should a signature block look? How should things be lined up within the note? How should we handle a choice list where you can choose more than one thing? Should there be commas at the end of each choice? Should there not be? Should there be colons? What should there be? The configuration guide goes through all of those different pieces of information. So when we pull a note together, we mostly follow the configuration guide, but we do just like you do at your facilities. We get clinicians, or the group of clinicians, who prefer to see a note in a different way, so we may go outside of that configuration guide to meet the needs of that group for workflow or whatever the need is. So once all of that's done, it goes to our first alpha site. And as I mentioned, there's only a handful of sites in the Army that have standard content outside of the chaplain stuff right now. WIN was the alpha site, if I'm not mistaken, the alpha site for the perioperative content. WOMAC, the beta site for the perinatal content. Madigan, a beta site for med-surg content. And who am I? I may be missing someone, but those are the three. I think those are Darnall, sorry. Darnall has also been a beta site for our pharmacy content. So the pharmacy content is at its last beta right now, which is a Navy facility. It should have been done months ago, but that Navy facility was testing different content, so they kind of held off on the pharmacy content. So that's something that we should be coming out very soon. So you see there, basically everything goes to an initial alpha site, and then it goes to a beta site, and then the last beta site. So the expectations, if you're an alpha or a beta site, are that that you would expect updates to occur within the documentation. So for the alpha site, the updates, and they could be large, they could be small. We're not really sure till we take it there. Hopefully they're not too large, but you should definitely see some updates. Then when it goes to the first beta sites, we would still see additional updates, but they should be fairly minor. Now, in the case of MedSurg, because I know we have people from Madigan on the line, I want to make a statement that it was a little bit different with MedSurg because the alpha site was the site where the content started. So there were very few updates at the alpha site. It wasn't until we went to the beta site that we started to see updates. And that was because our alpha site didn't need to make any, they needed to make very few and very little modifications to any kind of workflow or things that they were already doing, because that was the content that the group had chosen to use as a baseline. So Madigan was almost like our alpha site when it came to that MedSurg content. Also with MedSurg, and we may see it happen with some other groups, we are going to add a third beta site, and the reason for that is because the content finalization didn't happen the way we had hoped it would. Essentially, we have provider notes and nursing notes. The nursing notes are not finished yet, so because of that, we are at our second beta site for MedSurg, but we need to make sure the provider and the nursing notes are deployed together. The other piece of that MedSurg content that's very important and people are very interested in is the ICE and Melder interface, and CCI is working out some last minute tweaks with that interface. So we have added WIN as the third beta for MedSurg, and at that point when we take it to them, the content should be finalized and being prepared for general release. So depending on the content and what happens with the content, we may add a third beta site. So this is a content standardization life cycle. You can see here that we do the release planning. We go through content release, and then we look for feedback from the MTF users. The email address that you see there, ehr-inpatient.optimization@amed.army.mil, that is for all CAGs. Any feedback that your facilities or anyone has about the standard content can come to that email address. Of course, we ask for solutions with the problem. So if there's an issue that, I don't like this, then, give us a suggestion for how to make it better. So just when you're talking to your folks, make sure and advertise that email address. Fixes will be done centrally and pushed to sites. So we are learning this, as I've kind of mentioned, as we go, and sometimes we can't always do it that way, or during testing we may actually make local sites as we're making central. We may actually make local updates, as we're making central updates to push to the site. But what's important to know is that if there's any local updates made to the note, every time we push a central update, those local updates will be overwritten. So if you are needing to or wanting to make local updates to the standard notes, you need to bring those through the email address listed here so we can get them included in the approved list of updates, and then we will do everything we can to make sure that they're not overwritten. I'm not saying that they still wouldn't be, it depends on what it is, but we definitely would work to make sure that it's not that way. If it's an unapproved edition, then we want it to overwrite because it's an unapproved edition. So everything needs to come back through the groups. Okay, so I'm going to jump through these next slides rather quickly. I think I thought that I would go through this quicker than I have. So if you have, I want to leave time for you guys to ask questions. But you can see the list of notes here that each individual group is doing. As I mentioned with Med-Surg, our nurses are still working on the admission history and the shift assessment. Something that's going to be different for everybody, that I'll just kind of put out there right now, is that the nursing shift assessment is also the initial assessment. So the idea is that, you know, you need to do that full assessment each shift. So why not use the same one? And then the first one is the initial assessment. And that way you have more consistency throughout your documentation and your, you know, you can take a look at the first, you know, what was it like on the first day versus the last day for reporting and that sort of thing. Perioperative, you can see there's a number of notes that are going out with this. And again, when was the alpha for that? And then the betas were Navy and Air Force sites. This is one that when we do take Med-Surg to win, we will be able to group the perioperative and the Med-Surg content together. That's something that we'll be talking about this week when the ECAG meets in San Diego, is how are we going to deploy these things. And you know, we've been looking at bundling, and so bundling, for example, perioperative and Med-Surg together and bringing them to a site at one time, not necessarily deploying it all on one day, but bringing it and phasing it out as we go. And there's many different reasons for that. So if you have questions or would like to discuss that more in detail, just let me know. It might be better to wait till next week though, because you never know what will happen this week at the meeting. So I don't know for sure that's what we're going to do, but that's been the discussion thus far. Here you can see perinatal lines, the perinatal line of service and the many notes that they have worked on and are testing. And then ancillary services, we talked about chaplains. The lab is a little bit different than these other ones, but we are working on 3D. It's called lab mapping with all of our sites. Madigan is the test site for this, for the Army. Once we do Madigan, then we'll be able to most likely start mapping multiple sites at one time. Madigan is probably about 80% done with the process. I mentioned pharmacy already. There's only 2 pharmacy notes, the pharmacy note and the pharmacy interventions. The pharmacy note is what many of you would call a super note. It includes many different pieces within it, from renal dosing to pharmacokinetics, anticoagulation, etc. Respiratory therapy is also working on notes as well as flow sheets. So that group has been working hard for a number of months at this point. Physical therapy also working on their notes. Okay, so I want to get into this training piece. Those of you who are at an inpatient facility, if you're not aware, when you're in Essentris, there's something called a web links. And I didn't think to include a slide of that, so I apologize. But when you go into Essentris, on the top right hand side of the screen, there will be a menu option for web links. Within the web links, there should be one called Resource Center or Essentris Resource Center. If you go to that link, this is what you will see. It's a work in progress, as if a CAG is not ready for release, there may not be any content there. So when you go to the initial page, you see a shell of what will be there, and depending on which group you choose, which CAG you choose, you will find their release notes. But if that CAG's not finished and the information's not ready for release, you will not find it yet. So for example, if you go to chaplain, you should find some information. You'll also find general information throughout the Resource Center. Here you have, I went through Med-Surg as an example, so you can look at the workflow and how things are expected to go with that release. There's also what's new in the release. So the content release notes. This is a question I hear fairly regularly. How is this note different than the old one? And it's basically impossible to answer because there was not one old note. There were 58 old notes. Some of them may have been very similar, but so there's no easy way to map from the old note to the new note. But basically, the release notes will go through and show you what the major updates are, or not updates, but what is the major content. And then as we go through and make updates, there will be update release notes that will from that point show any changes. Just to kind of show you what the content release notes look like. Here you can see Essentris refresher tutorials. These are things that you all can take advantage of and use as part of your toolbox for training. Many of these are not specific to a CAG. They're tutorials about how to use Essentris. Documents for download. This would be specific to the CAG. You have the cheat sheet, user competencies. That's one that I'll show you here. That's a training tool. Content release notes, and then the content overview presentation. The purpose of the presentation is for you to use with maybe leadership or meetings to show what the content overview looks like. So here is an example of what the user competency form looks like. It's a one-pager to make sure that the user is ready to use the material. Feedback, you can go to the feedback loop and find the email address that I had advertised. Click on it and your Outlook will open for you to send an email. We do not have a specialized form at this point. We wanted to make it as easy as possible for people to just shoot out their feedback and not have to think about filling out a form. So I'm sure we will end up developing a form that we could reply with and say, okay, we need more information, and to get that information, here's this form. I wouldn't be surprised if that comes down at some point. Using the Resource Center, it just talks about a little bit about what it is, what it's used for. Okay. So, just to wrap things up, inpatient standardization is coming. It will take some time as we develop this deployment plan and how we get things out to facilities. We will definitely keep everyone aware through the AIPT meetings, which trainers do dial into as well. All of you are welcome to dial into those meetings. If you are interested, just talk with the Essentris System Administrator from your site. And get me the information to add you to the meeting invites. CAGs are comprised of clinicians from your facilities. So if your facilities are not involved, please make sure that they are involved. We want them to be there. We want our content to be widely accepted as it's pushed out to the facilities. And the more bedside clinicians that we have involved, the better it's going to be. Training is vital in all of this for successful implementation, especially. The amount of training may change depending on what the content is and how much is being released at one time, but we can't do it without your help, and we can't do it without a strong training and workflow analyst involvement. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and unlock the talk button. If anybody has any questions, please feel free to ask or raise your hand, or I'll let Elizabeth take care of that part.
Hey, fantastic. Thank you very much, Kim. We are going to open this up to Q&A, and if you raise your hand, I'll be able to hand you a microphone. If you're either talk shy or not confident about your speaking abilities due to your headset audio issues, see, I can barely talk, then please feel free to write your question in the chat pod. I don't know if you can see that first question.
I do see it. Is there a location to see all of the projects assigned by the region? So I'm not sure if you're referring to Essentris related projects or projects overall. At this time, I mean, I don't know how to answer that, Major Davis. Oh, projects overall. Not that I am aware of. Elizabeth, do you have any information about that? Projects?
I'm going to plead ignorance on that one. So only the presenters can see what the questions are, the way it's been written. So the question at hand here is there somewhere that folks can have visibility of projects that have been assigned regionally and projects beyond just Essentris? I think that is a terrific question, mainly because I don't know the answer to it, but if there are others that would like to take a stab at an answer that think they've got a good answer, please raise your hand or put something in the chat pod, and I will pass you a microphone. Well, I think we're going to put that in the category of take that question to folks that are not on here and try
Thank
to
you,
get,
Elizabeth, and that's something that we can always
everyone.
update during the AIPT as well. But if you're recording the questions, I would greatly appreciate that. Are there any other questions right now? Well, I don't see any. I would just like to thank you all for your time and again let you know that if you do have any questions or comments, please feel free to contact me at any time. It's Kimberly Stillman. You can either contact me directly or you can always use that CAG feedback email address as it not only goes to me but it goes to Carol Sadio, Chris Nichols. We manage that link or that email address for the Army side so we can get the questions out to the right people. So with that said, please feel free to contact me at any time, and thank you all very much.